The capital of the Czech Republic is often called the Golden City and the Mother of Cities, but its most fitting nickname is the City of 100 Spires. It's enough to stand in the middle of the main square and take a look around to see that Prague deserves this nickname. Moreover, the tops of the spires are incredibly alike. On the Old Town Square, which in Czech is called Staroměstské náměstí, stands the Old Town Hall, the Teen Church, and one can see the towers of the Magazine and the towers of the Charles Bridge, all built in the same fashion. The square itself is approximately 9,000 square meters. Its shape and size had been decided on around 1230 AD by King Wenceslas I. The 800 years passed since then made their mark. Executions, coronations, and assemblies took place here, making the square the center of the city's social life. Under the protection of the two fortresses of Hradčany and Vyšehrad, artisans, craftsmen, and businessmen settled down here. Soon, the marketplace of the Roman Prague was established, as well as the city, later to be surrounded by a wall and a moat. The famous clock of the town hall, the Prague Orloj, was designed by Nicholas of Copenhagen and was later modified by clockmasters Hanus and Taborski. The clock itself is made of 3 parts and is surrounded by a Gothic stone frame. The figures of the puppet play appear every hour. The first figure is a skeleton holding an hourglass, which symbolizes mortality, and the rope of a death bell. After the skeleton come the 12 apostles and a figure wearing a turban, which represents the Turkish menace. The figures have been renovated several times. Some of the original puppets are now at the National Museum. The dial shows the movement of the sun and the moon, and of course, the passing of time. Around the dial, there are the signs of the zodiac. The pictures of the calendar were painted by Josef Manus in 1866. The new entrance of the town hall and the Gothic windows were designed by the same Matej Rejsek who designed the magazine. One can see the monument of Jan Zalivsky on the outer wall of the tower, a friend of Jan Hus, who was executed in the yard of the town hall. The word teen means market, so the Teen Church means a church standing in the market square. The Gothic building with the archway on the eastern side of the square is partly hiding the church. There was a school here where the famous architect Matej Rejsek taught. The 3-naved Gothic church was a church for the foreign traders who sold and kept their goods in the nearby Ungelt yard. The Teen served the Hussites from the 15th century. Its most famous sculpture is the tympanum, showing the Passion of Christ. To the right of the main altar stands the tomb of the Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe, who stayed at the court of Rudolf II and was the master of Kepler. The copper line running along the square surface is the physical labeling of the meridian running here. Jan Hus was a dean of the Prague University, a famous professor, and a brilliant orator. He spoke against the hypocrisy and lifestyle of the noblemen and high-ranking clerical leaders, scourging blind faith and dogmas. His preaching unleashed the 1419 revolution. Jan Hus was burnt at the stake. His monument, made by Vladislav Saloon, was given to the public 500 years later. The other church of Staroměstské náměstí is a snow-white Baroque building. The St. Nicholas Church, standing on a street corner, was designed by Kilian Ignaz Dietzenhofer in Baroque style. The fresco in the dome is the work of the famous Bavarian artist Peter Azam, while the sculptures were created by Czech Baroque masters Antonín and Matej Braun. The buildings of the square were named, according to medieval tradition, after the residents, their purpose, or their sculptures. This music school is called Smetana and was established by the composer himself. Next to it, there is a house with stone sheep. In the building near the town hall is a pharmacy called the White Lion. The name of the house with the stone bells speaks for itself. The Roman buildings of the old town were 2 to 3 meters below sea level, so every spring, when the Vltava flooded, they were in danger. The area was artificially banked up at the end of the 13th century so the first floor of the Roman buildings became the basement for the Gothic houses. Along the city wall, there was a deep moat which was filled up at the same time. It became the inner boulevard, similar to Vienna's Ring and the Graben. The old town square is still the heart of Prague. According to U Kalycha, the buildings, which were renovated and kept in their original style, emit such a historical atmosphere that one feels that the city is one giant museum. But as we walk on the streets, we soon realize that Prague is not only a giant museum, but a constantly renewing capital, a spiritual and artistic center as well. The magazine is the only remaining entrance from the old town's city wall. It was designed by Matej Rysik in a late Gothic style upon the request of Vladislas II. Its name was given in the 17th century when it was used for storing gunpowder. There's a stunning sight from the tower of the 213-foot-tall building. The Art Nouveau-style building attached to the side of the magazine tower is the Prague Representation House today. It was built on the place of the former royal palace. There are conference rooms, concert halls, exhibitions, restaurants, and cafes in it. The Faust House got its name from the strange fact that its residents all dealt with chemical experiments or alchemy. The neighbors were always curious about the mystical naturalists, gold makers, and other adventurers. The alchemists looked for the philosopher's stone, which transformed everything into gold, and for this they were willing to sell their soul to the devil. The legend of Faust, the most famous version of which is by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, was also known in Prague. Soon gossip started to refer to the building standing on Charles Square as the Faust House. The two-storied Renaissance house received some new Baroque ornaments in the 18th century. Today, in a sense, the house is still a place for natural sciences. It operates as a hospital and pharmacy. Antonin Dvorak lived at 10 Jesna Street in one of the bigger flats of a tenement house. There's no plaque on the house, and the Museum of the Life of the Composer is situated 2 streets away in the so-called American House. The one-story pretty Baroque house was designed by Dientzenhofer for Count Władysław Mieszna. The frescoes were painted by Jan Ferdinand Schor, while the statues are the works of the Brown family. After the family line of the Count was cut, the house became a restaurant under the name America. Antonin Dvorak died in 1904. After his death, the city council decided that a museum would be dedicated to him in this building. The original furniture from his study was moved here, as well as his personal items, musical instruments, scores, and manuscripts. The City of Prague Philharmonic started their career in 1896 with Dvorak's New World Symphony. The pub U Kalycha, which means the goblet, was made well known by the world-famous novel of Hasek, Schweik. This is the place where the brave soldier waits for his friends at 6 after the war. Everything here reminds the visitor of the novel. There are portraits of Franz Joseph I, small sketches, drawings on the wall. The bar has not changed since World War I. If we look under the glass, Schweik is smiling at us everywhere from the beer mat. The place is not cheap, but the beer is very good, as well as the authentic Czech dishes they offer. For starters, sausage marinated in a spicy vinegar sauce is recommended, and we can have dumplings with the main course, whether our choice is beef, pork, or poultry. Since the Czech Republic has no sea, freshwater fish is very popular. How else could they prepare carp, if not with a beer sauce? The mountain rivers offer high-quality trout. Game is also prepared, especially pheasant and partridge. Among the poultry, duck and goose is more common than turkey. If someone wants to go with cold dishes, there are many kinds of cheese, pâtés, and cold meats to choose from. Beer will go well with all of these. In medieval times, this area was outside the city and belonged to a village called Bojice. Wenceslas Square is quite familiar to everyone who's visited Prague. Of course, you won't find it on the maps under this name, since the locals call it Václavské náměstí. It's not even a square, rather a street, 2,460 feet long and 197 feet wide. Based on its form and function, it's similar to the Spanish Ramblas, central points of local economical and cultural life. In the time of Charles IV, people held horse markets, sold wheat, hay, and other agricultural products here. These markets existed until 1877, when the merchants started to move into stores. There are no real monuments on Wenceslas Square. Many baroque palaces have become hotels, such as the Ambassador, the Tatra, the Golden Goose, and the most famous of them all, Hotel Europe. Not so long ago, there was a tram stop on this square. Now, only one car of it remained here, which has become a lovely little restaurant. The majority of the buildings of Wenceslas Square have passages, little covered rows of shops. Of course, the selection of the stores is different from earlier times. There are many clothing stores here, but one can also find toy and bookshops, as well as paper and electronic stores. The statue of St. Wenceslas can be found at the top of the square. The work of Josef Václav Myslbek was given to the public in 1913. At the foot of the statue, there are the four patron saints, Ludmila, Prokop, Agnes, and Adalbert. This statue closes the square in majestic style. Behind the statue, there's the huge building of the National Museum. The idea of the museum originates from a certain historian named Franciszek Palacký, but it was only built later with the help of enthusiastic aristocrats. The construction of the Neo-Renaissance palace began in 1885, supervised by Josef Schultz. There are historical figures standing on the stairs of the hall, while the frescoes depict Czech fortresses. Stairs lead to the main entrance from both sides of the building. The main ornament of the facade, which is 100 meters long, is the large dome representing the Pantheon of Rome. Charles Square is the center of the new town. Cattle markets were held there from 1348, but later butchers, slaughtermen, and fishermen also moved here, so all kinds of meat were available at this market. It remained like this until 1860, when the square was rebuilt and the market was moved near Můstek. That's when the park at the side of the new town city hall was established with all its wells and statues. Here stands the statue of the poet Vitus Cathedral, whose poem served as the inspiration for Dvořák's Requiem. The city hall stands in the northern corner of the square. The four inner cities of Prague were directed from here until they were unified in 1784. From the original Gothic building, only the basement and the large hall of the first floor have remained. This serves as an assembly hall. Banquets and concerts are held here. U Fleku is easily recognizable from its giant clock in the narrow Kremencova street. This famous pub can be mentioned right alongside Schweig, where it is recommended to book a table in advance in the summer months. Beer has been brewed here since the middle of the 15th century. The old brewery operated in the yard, which is today a garden belonging to the restaurant. This garden, full of statues, ornamented glass, and geraniums, is the work of the architect Sander and the painter Novak. There's only one beer here, the specialty of the house, which is a strong dark beer with a taste similar to porter or Guinness. The Most Legi Narodny used to be called May 1st Bridge not so long ago. It starts from the National Museum and leads to Petrin Hill. The theater standing on the bank of the Vltava is a masterpiece of 19th century Czech architecture. It was designed by Josef Žižek. The theater, built from public donations, burnt to the ground before the opening ceremony. Therefore, the reconstruction started all over under the guidance of Josef Schultz. Thanks to donations of the locals, the rebuilt Narodny Divadlo could hold its opening performance within 2 years, starting with the performance of the opera Libus from Smetana. The bridge was designed by Balsanic and built at the turn of the 20th century. It replaced Prague's second bridge and was necessary due to increased traffic. In addition to cars, a tram also runs on it. The simple bridge is decorated by an ornamented railing and lanterns. It offers a good view of the Charles Bridge and the aquatic life of the area regulated by dams. Larger ships are not allowed here. Sometimes rowing competitions are held here, and because of the boats and the paddle boats, the whole area looks like a lake. The area under the new town, on the bank of the Vltava, is called Vyšehrad. It is not to be mistaken for the Hungarian Vishegrad, although the meaning of the two words is the same, citadel. According to legend, Princess Libus predicted the founding of Prague here. The princess was a daughter of Krok from the Przemysl dynasty. Whether she was real or just a legend is still unclear, but Vyšehrad became a rival to Prague Castle in the 10th century. The fortress was built in a strategically good place, therefore Vratislav I made it his castle. It was first demolished by the Hussites, and the destruction was repeated after the 30 Years' War. While the castle is visited by millions, the ruins of Vyšehrad are almost unknown. The old cemetery between St. Martin's Rotunda and the Prebendal Church became a pantheon where the greats of the nation were buried, for example, Karl Kapek, Jan Neruda, Smetana, and Dvorak. From 1868 to 1869, Bedřich Smetana, who's mostly famous for his work The Moldau, lived in the Lazansky Palace. Looking through the windows, he enjoyed the view of the river and the towers of the castle. He also composed his opera Dalibor here. The former garden of the Lazansky Palace is now a park. The statue of Francis Joseph I, formerly standing on the bank, was placed back into its original location in 2003. A gallery named after Haller was opened on the riverbank. This famous coppersmith captured pictures of London before the Great Fire. Before that, he also made pictures of Prague, which can be viewed at the National Museum. The little peninsula near the water tower is called Novotny Bridge, although it isn't a bridge, but a restaurant. The St. Salvator Church joins the facade of the Clementinum. The late Renaissance building was transformed into a Baroque one in 1659. At the foot of the Charles Bridge, on the Knights of the Cross Square, stands the St. Francis of Assisi Church. There's a friary connected to the Baroque church from the right. The square wasn't named after the Crusaders, but after the Order of the Knights of the Red Cross, which built the temple. The role of the one and only Czech Knight Order was similar to those of the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem. They built hospitals and tended to the ill. This square is considered one of the nicest in Europe. There are two statues there. The first one is the statue of Charles IV, the other of St. Wenceslas. He was the grandson of Bořivoj, the first Christian Czech lord. He was murdered by his own brother, Boleslav. Opposite the bridge tower in the old town stand the buildings of the Clementinum, which is the second largest after the Prague Castle. It faces 4 narrow streets. Previously, there were 32 houses, several gardens, and parks in its place. The Clementinum now surrounds 4 rectangular courtyards. There are 3 churches attached to it, the Saint Saviour, the Saint Clement, and the Italian chapel. It was originally built to be a Jesuit monastery and boarding school. The building was named after Saint Clement, and this name stuck to it. However, it's had no clerical function since 1773, when the Jesuit order was disbanded by Empress Maria Theresa. For a long time, one of the pride and joys of the Czech Republic was the Škoda factory of Mladá Boleslav. It was a great idea to use the luxury model of the 1960s, the Felicia Coupe, as a tourist attraction. One can ride in open Škodas in the Old Town and the territory of the Prague Castle. Nowadays, some veteran models can be seen on the streets of Prague as well. In the Josefov district, at the foot of the Manas Bridge, stands the building of the Rudolfinum, named after the Crown Prince. The Neo-Renaissance Palace was built to be a gallery and a place for the applied arts collection. Between 1918 and 1939, the Czech Parliament resided here. After World War II, it was called the House of Artists. Today, it operates as an opera and serves as the home of the Prague Philharmonic. There was a place in Prague, even as early as 1091, where Jews lived separately due to economic and religious reasons. They had their own self-government, but their separateness did not mean the loss of their cultural and scientific life. There were many scientists, rabbis, philosophers, poets, astronomers, and even travelers and writers among them. The ghetto remained closed by gates until 1848, when Jews were given citizenship during the Revolution. At the end of the century, most of the buildings were torn down, with only a few synagogues, the assembly hall, and the cemetery remaining. However, the Josefov district is still one of a kind. It's a fully protected monument, and there's no tourists coming to Prague who would miss it. There are several explanations for the name of the Old New Synagogue. Some say the Gothic church was built on a Roman foundation, hence the name. Others say it's a simple mistake because the Hebrew expression alt-nai means temporary, was understood as alt-neu, which means old new translated from German. This building has an unusually high roof, accessible only by a ladder from the outside. There's a strict order prohibiting anyone to take a peek into the attic where, according to legend, the remains of Golem can be found. The synagogue was built in 1270. Its two bodies are connected by a 5-part arch, which is unique in Prague. Most of the visitors are not interested in the colorful and valuable artifacts, since they came here for the legend of Golem. The legend says that Rabbi Löw, master of Kabbalah and magic, created Golem from clay. He brought it to life by magic, and the giant performed the most difficult tasks. Once, however, he forgot about him, and the enraged homunculus started to wreak havoc. The rabbi took the paper with the spell on it out of its mouth and had Golem taken to the attic of the synagogue. Egon Ervig Kish, the famous reporter, climbed up to the attic in the 20th century, but found nothing. What remained are the legend, the novel of Gustav Meyrink, and several movies. The story of Golem already inspired silent film directors Paul Wegener and Julien Duvivier. The Jewish quarter has not been excluded from the commercial attitude of the 21st century either. There are many people selling goods on the small street leading from Stara Nova to the cemetery. Most of the goods are related to Jewish religion, but one can also buy Golem figures in several sizes. Just be careful with bringing it to life. The Jewish cemetery was established in 1439, when the Jews were forced to bury their dead within the walls of their own quarter. The first grave was the grave of Avigdor Caro, the well-known poet. The cemetery is very crowded and confusing. This is no surprise since there was not enough space, so 12 layers were used to bury the dead. There are 4 or 5 stones on one grave that were brought here from the former dissolved cemeteries. The epitaphs are often poems, and the depiction of humans is also unique. Here lies Marcus Mordecai Meisel, the protector of the Jewish community at that time, historian David Gans, and astronomer Joseph Delmadigo, but most of the people are looking for the grave of Rabbi Löw. Yehudi Löw ben Bezalel knew the Talmud well, and was not only dealing with mystical studies, but he had admittance to the royal court, where he could interact with the best scientists of his age. The Klaus Synagogue was built beside the old cemetery on the place where Rabbi Löw was teaching. Today, it serves as a museum, familiarizing visitors with Jewish traditions. The rich material tells the visitor a lot about life in the ghetto, the customs and traditions. There are also a library and an archive in the building. In the Jewish ghetto, the clock runs backwards, and you also go backwards through a slow life, climbing the Kradzeny, listening at nightfall, to bohemian songs in the singing taverns. This wrote Apollinaire. Prague also inspired Hungarian poet Margit Kafka to write a poem when she visited the city in 1910. Beneath me there are streets and towers and the citadel, heavy stone bridges, and on the platinum-colored water, the glamour of this old royal city sends a message. Prepare for the many sights with fresh nerves today. Prague, just like Rome, was built on 7 hills. There are hills on both sides of the Vltava, therefore Prague is full of points from where the whole town can be viewed. One of the best sights can be seen from the lookout tower of Petrin Hill, but it's closely followed by the one from Vitkov Hill and that of Vyšehrad. The restaurant called Barandov Terrace, located in front of the film factory, is very famous, but of course the towers of the city also function as lookouts. One can enjoy different parts of the city from the magazine, St. Vitus Cathedral, the Tower of the Charles Bridge, or from the top of the National Museum. It's surprising how interesting the city can be from a small boat on the Vltava or from one of the small islands. After the Manas Bridge, Letna Park follows the river for a while. This wild area has been a park since 1858. Above it, there's a grove for running, roller skating, or simply for walking. There's also a planetarium, an open-air cinema, an exhibition hall, an open-air theater, and a restaurant here. The locals visit the place quite often because of the beautiful site. The Vltava is the second largest river of the country, joining the Elbe just 50 kilometers from Prague, which is why it was regularly used for shipping purposes. In the city, it divides into 2 small rivers, the Botic and the Rokutka. It's only 1,000 feet wide at its widest point and only 10 feet deep. In Prague, 13 bridges cross the river. In Old Prague, there was only a wooden bridge spanning it, which was later changed to a stone one, named after the wife of Vladislas I, Judith. This was later destroyed by a flood. The new bridge had to fit the increasing use, and at the same time had to express the kingdom's richness and love for the arts. The construction of the bridge started upon the order of Charles IV in 1357. However, the name Charles has only been used since 1870. Before that, it was simply called the Stone Bridge or Prague Bridge in foreign countries. The work of architect Peter Parler made its mark on Prague's medieval look. He was only 27 years old when he won the royal assignment to build a bridge. He had to create a bridge between the old town and the Prague Castle, and at the same time he had to protect the bridge in case an attack should occur. This latter condition explains the 2 towers at both ends of the bridge. The bridge, which is 1,693 feet long, is held by 16 white limestone blocks. The construction is 33 feet wide, which was enough space for merchants to set up their pavilions. There was never such a permanent marketplace here as, for example, on the Rialto in Venice, but it's always been lively. Even jousts were held, but the place saw more serious fights as well, when Frederick V escaped to here after the Battle of White Mountain. The situation got even worse when the Swedes attacked the castle from here at the end of the 30-Year War. Some statues were destroyed during these battles. Among the 30 statues of the bridge, many come from the Brown family, known for their other works for Prague, as well as from Jan Brokoff and his 2 sons. The statues were ordered by private people, religious orders, or institutions, mostly by pledge or out of gratitude. On a tragic night in September 1890, the river washed away a part of the bridge. Except for the fire in the National Theatre, there was no such horror story in the history of Prague as the destruction of the Charles Bridge, said one article in the newspapers of the following day. Luckily, there are no visible memories of the destruction, and the bridge looks like it always did. The ability of Prague to create legends is still alive. Nowadays, many people assign luck-bringing powers to the statue of John of Nepomuk. Therefore, everyone touches it, be it a local or a foreigner. The statue's almost completely shiny, and it's possible that it will be totally smooth in no time. Allegedly, the saint was drowned here on the order of Wenceslas IV because he didn't want to divulge the confessions of the Queen to the king. Centuries later, he became the patron saint of bridges and roads. There are two towers in the lesser quarter. The smaller one, a Roman tower, has a pointed arch and is a part of the fort of the former Judith Bridge. It seems the city planners had no heart to demolish it. The other one was built by order of George of Podebrady in Renaissance style. The two towers are connected by a Gothic gate. The strange thing is that the taller tower is unfinished. Its facade should have been the same as the one on the side of the old town. From the top of the Gothic gate, one can see the Mostecca Street and the masses on the bridge in the other direction. There are legends, myths, or tales connected to almost every statue in Prague. These were collected in the 60s by Karl Kreitzy in his volume entitled The Legends of Prague. It's a handy book for lovers of the city. It's worth it to climb up the creaking stairs leading up the tower, since the view is magnificent from the terraces. If one goes up to the attic, one can see stone cannonballs and some clay. Is it possible that Golem was not lying in the attic of the synagogue after all? Beneath us, there is the Judith Tower and people milling on the Charles Bridge. One can see the Gothic gate and the Mostecca Street behind it. The Three Ostriches house is famous as the location of the first cafe in Prague, opened by an Armenian, Deodatus Damian, who prepared Turkish coffee. The building, which was built in 1585, still functions as a restaurant, as can be seen from the tower. Looking to the west, one can see the towers of the St. Vitus Cathedral, with the buildings of the castle district at its feet. Not very far under it, there's the dome of the St. Nicholas Church. When the weather is clear, one can see the green vineyards in the distance that contrast with the red rooftops. At one's feet, there is the whole lesser district, the Mala Strana. There are many bourgeois houses in the streets of this quarter. These are homes of craftsmen, merchants, and innkeepers, which were built at the same time as the nearby aristocrats' palaces. The poet Jan Neruda lived here, who wrote an article in a well-known daily newspaper about the Charles Bridge and John of Nepomuk every 16th of May. Wandering here, one is followed by other Czech writers, Karl Čapek, Jaroslav Hasek, Jiří Marek, and Bohumil Hrabal. Josef Manes was the most important Czech painter of the 19th century, after whom a statue and a bridge are named here. Puppet theater has a great tradition in the Czech Republic. The most popular are the so-called marionettes, which are moved from above with the help of strings. Those who like them can take them home, since they're sold as souvenirs in many stores of the lesser district. This district is very romantic and uniform from the architectural point of view. Most of its buildings are done in Baroque style, but there are Renaissance and Gothic elements in the foundations of the houses. In the inner yards and gateways, one can often see Gothic arches and window frames. There are golden, painted, wrought, or carved signs on almost every building. The locals probably find their way better relying on the white doves, golden bells, lions, or blue foxes than on the street numbers. This part was already inhabited in the 8th century, but only became a city during the reign of Přemysl Ottokar II. According to this, the lesser district is the second oldest part of Prague, behind the old town. What's really unique is that the locals did not allow the remaining stone coves of the Judith Bridge to deteriorate. They built a house on the top of the Kampa Island. the Roman-style remains serve as a foundation for this building. The Kampa is a long island on the Vltava, which is separated from the bank by the Devil's Ditch. There were houses here in the medieval times already, mostly watermills, therefore it was called Mill's Ditch until 1892. The reason the name was changed to Devil's Ditch, Čertovka in Czech, is not known. The origin of the name Kampa is known, however. It refers to Tikhon Ganskeb from Kamp, who had a garden here. The ditch is called the Venice of Prague, which is understandable to a certain extent. The colorful houses mirroring on the surface of the water are very picturesque, but the gondolas are missing, while the mills rather resemble the landscape of the Netherlands or Belgium. There's a gunpowder workshop here, the house of the scientist Josef Dabrowski, and 2 mills, Miller's Sofas and one of the Priory. Tourist boats leave from the vicinity of the latter. There are small boats for 4 to 6 persons and large ones for more than 30 persons. Passengers are offered coffee, tea, or ice cream while they wait for the boat to leave. The boats pass by the Kafka Museum, a few restaurants, and Latna Park before turning back near the Czech Bridge. The dams on the river were supposed to protect the city from the floods, but they failed to do so several times. Those who saw the reports will not forget the huge flood a few years back, which took several lives. The marks of the water level in the lesser district are mostly above the doors. The boats slide into the closed bay behind the Novotny Bridge. There's an inn under the bridge where, if the passengers want, the boat stops. They proceed among other boats, paddle boats, and other sorts of water vehicles until the dams, then advancing near the Kampa and beneath the arches of the Charles Bridge to return to the bay. Wallenstein Palace lies at the foot of the castle. Austrian Duke Albrecht Eusebi of Wallenstein was an outstanding general in the 30-Year War. He was an aggressive, adventurous, intriguing soldier, an unpleasant but very talented person, who was not only the best strategic mind of his age, but also a very good businessman. He collected a large fortune from the spoils of war, confiscated lands, and conducted dubious business. The emperor made him the Duke of Friedland in the northern part of the Czech Republic. His name was written as Waldstein in Czech. He was out of favor several times, but when the Swedish King Gustav II Adolf entered the war, he was called back and was made supreme commander. In Wallenstein Palace, one can see the horse of the general, which died at the Battle of Lützen. Wallenstein had such a huge fortune that he was able to keep a private army. But that did not protect him from intrigues. The emperor was made to believe that Wallenstein wanted the Czech throne for himself, so he was killed. He was murdered by a group of officers from the Imperial Guard in the city of Kep. In the palace, one can also see the rug his body was rolled into. His palace was confiscated by the emperor, but was later returned to his heirs, who owned it until the nationalization in 1945. The first Baroque palace of Prague was designed by Italian architects Andrea Spezzo and Niccolo Sebregondi. The palace has 5 courtyards and a huge park. The assembly hall is 2 stories high, which is enlarged even more by the help of mirrors. The fresco on the ceiling is the work of the same Baccio Bianco who decorated the Sala Terrena. This is the most beautiful building of the garden, a large, three-arched assembly hall. Stuccos ornament the interior. The first performance of Friedrich Schiller's drama trilogy about Wallenstein took place here. There are statues of antique gods on the paths of the garden, which are the works of Dutch sculptor Anton de Vries, who settled down in Bohemia. Although the original statues were taken by the Swedes as spoils of war, the copies are also very good. Beside the loggia is an artificial cave. The building serves as a birdhouse today. There are majestic peacocks walking up and down on the lawn of the park. Obviously, they like it here, considering they've already established their family. There's a large artificial lake at the eastern end of the park. Behind the lake, a gallery has been set up in a former stable. The palace is so huge that it gives room to the Komensky Pedagogical Museum and some offices of the Cultural Ministry, in addition to the gallery. There's a flag welcoming visitors at the lesser district end of the Manus Bridge, which was erected at the time of the change of the political system. From here, one can take the Latevska Street leading to the center of the district, the Malostranske Náměstí. There are many breweries along the way. Franz Kafka was born in 1883. He studied law at the German University of Prague. Even though he wrote his famous novels, The Trial and The Castle in German, he's at least as connected to Prague as James Joyce is to Dublin. The complexity of his works, usually starting from a realistic situation, but then becoming absurd and transcendental, made it possible for several, sometimes controversial schools to claim him as their own. He died in Vienna, but later a plaque was placed on the building standing in the place of his birthplace, but the locals also keep showing the house in Gold Street, where he used to live for a while. After the turn of the century, a Kafka museum was opened on the bank of the Vltava, which attracts many visitors. From the end of the Charles Bridge, the Mostecca Street leads to the Church of St. Nicholas. The building of the former episcopate of Prague stood in this street. It was demolished, but the street still has many beautiful palaces, which were recently renovated. On one of them is a commemorative plaque to Ladislav Zelenka, the famous violinist. The Steinitz house is more than 600 years old. The Kaunitz Palace is famous for its Rococo facade. The tower of the chapel of the former episcopate stands in the yard of the House of Three Golden Bells. The Church of St. Nicholas is one of Prague's most monumental buildings with a huge green dome which attracts the eye. Two Dientzenhofers, a father and his son, designed it, while the interior is the work of Anselm Larago. The fresco on the ceiling depicts the life of St. Nicholas. The approximately 600 square yard painting is the work of Johann Lucas Kraker. The golden statue of St. Nicholas on the main altar is by Platzer. The Malostranske Náměstí is the main square of the lesser district. It's larger than the square of the old town, but the cathedral on it takes up so much space that it's hard to believe. The free market of the glass factories used to be held here. It vanished after World War II, and now there are only a few glass shops under the archways. The two most famous restaurants on the square are the Gaubitz House and the Lesser District Café. The Plague Pillar, erected in 1715, stands before the Liechtenstein Palace. There's a plaque on the wall of the Sternberg Palace stating that this was the place from where the great 1541 fire started. The Knights of Malta Square forms a great unity with the streets surrounding it. There was a spa in the Lazenska street in medieval times, hence its name. The Velika Prvorska Square is so close to the Maltetska Namesti that it's hard to decide where one ends and the other begins. The home of the order and the halls of the prior stand here. The building houses the musical collection of the National Museum. The next house was earlier a hotel called the Golden Unicorn. Beethoven stayed here for a while in 1796. There are two palaces of Bucquoy, general of the emperor, standing on the Prior's Square, which now house the French embassy. The Prague Castle district is called Hradčany in Czech. The royal gardens, although situated outside the walls, belong to the castle. In earlier times, the castle was connected to the gardens by the Powder Tower standing on pillars. The two ditches that were once here have been filled, the bridge demolished, the Brusnica Creek diverted to a covered canal, and the area surrounded. Deer Moat, until it was filled up, was a natural defense for the castle, with deer grazing on its lawn. Ferdinand I asked some Italian gardeners who had already proven their talent in Florence to renew the garden. There were statues, fountains placed here, and some deer were also moved here. There was a widely known lion's garden here during the reign of Rudolf II. The Ball Hall was built to be a covered royal sports court, but it was later used as a stable and a storage room. The facade is ornamented by false architectural elements like Renaissance graffito. The Baroque statues are from the Brown Workshop. The summer palace, the Belvedere, was built by Ferdinand I for his wife, Queen Anna, in Renaissance style. The building was designed by Paolo della Stella, while the garden and musical fountains are also work of Italian artists. Kotek Garden was built by the royal governor according to his own taste. The niece of Count Kotek, Sofia, was the wife of Franz Ferdinand, killed in Sarajevo. Karl Macha wrote, "The castle was napping in the twilight fog. Hundreds of colors of light were playing on the water beneath it. The pink skies were smiling above, and behind was Prague in the lap of the blue hills." The main entrance leads from the Hradčanské náměstí to the gardens. Its gate with a huge iron bar is protected by guards of honor. The Rococo palaces surrounding the yard are the youngest buildings of the castle district, dating from the middle of the 18th century. The gate of the middle wing is called the Matthias Gate after its builder, King Matthias II. The offices of the President of the Republic are on the left wing, while the right wing houses rooms for the guests of the President. Beneath the presidential suite, there are two flagpoles bearing the national flag. The second courtyard is twice as big as the first one and some 200 years older. The north wing originally gave room to the stables of Ferdinand II and later Rudolf. Now there are large halls here, which are presidential parlors. In the southeastern corner of the yard stands the St. Cross Chapel, designed by Anselmo Larago upon the order of Maria Theresa of Austria. There's the treasure room of St. Vitus Cathedral with such items as the chain mail of St. Wenceslas and the sword of Stephen I of Hungary. The latter one is most likely here because Prince Geza and Stephen I were baptized by the Bishop of Prague. The Baroque well of the yard is the work of Hieronymus Cole, while the smaller one with a wrought iron top is the work of Francesco di Torre. From the chambers, Baroque saints gaze down upon the visitors. Above the gate, looking towards the royal gardens, there's a gallery which once protected the famous collection of Rudolph II. There were pictures here from Leonardo, Rubens, Raffaello, Tintoretto, Holbein Dürer, and many others. A part of the treasure was taken by the Swedish army. What was left behind was taken to Vienna after the death of Rudolph II. These pictures can be seen today in the Kunsthistorisches Museum. In the third courtyard, the visitor feels a Gothic air instead of a Baroque one. It was built after the great 1541 fire. The building complex of the medieval royal palace is here. High above the buildings of the square, there's the tower of the St. Vitus Cathedral. The three-naved cathedral, which has 21 chapels, is about 400 feet long, the width is 200 feet, while the height of the central tower is almost 310 feet. There's a white marble tomb in front of the main altar, which is the final resting place of Ferdinand I and his wife. In the St. Cross Chapel, there's the bronze sarcophagus of Charles IV, but many other Przemysl family members also lie here. Since 1909, the bishops of the town are buried in the Bishop's Chapel. In the Maria Magdalena Chapel, there's the tomb of the two builders of the dome, Matthias of Arras and Peter Parler, which were found accidentally in 1928. The tomb of St. John of Nepomuk was designed by the famous master Fischer von Erlach. Maybe the most beautiful of all is St. Wenceslas Chapel, the Gothic masterpiece of Peter Parler. The entrance to the vault, locked by 7 locks, is also here. The crown, the orb, and the scepter are exhibited only on special occasion. The prebendal, library, and archives open from the tomb chapel. The facade of the gigantic building squeezed into the small courtyard is difficult to see in its entirety, similar to the Teen Church and the Church of St. Nicholas. The cathedral, which has 3 larger and several smaller towers, buttresses, and stone carvings, is the largest church in Prague, a Roman Catholic one. It's one of the 3 most well-known buildings of the city. Its towers can be seen from almost everywhere in Prague. It's not only a grandiose sight, but also a highly valuable historical building. Charles IV asked Matthias of Arras to build it in a place where previously only 2 smaller shrines had stood in 1344. His work was continued by Peter Parler and later his sons. The Renaissance top of the main tower was only finished in 1564. The new Baroque dome was designed by Nicolas Pacassi almost 200 years later. Finally, the building was finished on the 1000th anniversary of the birth of St. Wenceslas in 1929, but soon, in 1945, they already started to renovate it. The clock became a part of the tower during the reign of Rudolph II. Its lower dial shows the quarter, while its upper dial shows the full hours. The chorus of the cathedral is well known in all Europe. In addition to masses, many concerts are held here because of the good acoustics of the church. Franz Liszt conducted his Esztergom Mass here in September 1856. He met Smetana, who saw him as his ideal, for the first time at the banquet held in his honor. Over the following 1.5 decades, they met several times in Prague, Weimar, and Budapest. The sober moderateness of the buildings surrounding the third courtyard is owing to Nicolas Pacassi. The facade, which was reconstructed and simplified in the 18th century, hides 3 former palaces, a Renaissance and 2 Baroque residences. The southeastern corner even houses a Roman tower, which was previously a prison. This medley of styles was tamed by Pacassi, who ornamented the main facade with the statues of Plotzer. The 60-foot-high obelisk standing in the third courtyard was erected in honor of the 10th anniversary of the Republic. The famous bronze statue of St. George is the work of the Kolozsváry brothers from 1373. The statue was given as a present by Louis I of Hungary to his father-in-law, Charles IV. There are two existing copies. One stands beneath the Fisherman's Bastion in Budapest, while the other one is in front of the Reformed Church in Kolozsvár. Even the one standing in the castle is also a copy, since the original is kept in the gallery of St. George Square. The gate, ornamented by copper reliefs standing in the eastern corner of the square, leads to the St. George Square. In the alley, one can see a part of the filled-up moat. Near the moat, there's a copy of the medieval lifting machine made of wood. There are pictures showing how people could lift heavy loads like stones and other building materials to a height of 33 feet. St. George Square is the continuation of the third courtyard. If one stands in front of the Basilica of St. George, to the left there's the Provostal Palace, the former library, and the monastery of the nuns of the Benedictine order, which, since the dissolution of the order, gives room to a collection of Czech medieval arts. Behind one, among the pillars of the Vladislas Hall, are Renaissance windows. To the right, there's the former assembly hall and the archives. The two-towered Roman-style Basilica of St. George is the oldest surviving monument of the Prague Castle. Inside the basilica are the tombs of Vratislav, the founder of the church, Prince Boleslav II, and the martyr Saint Ludmila. Ludmila was the grandmother of Saint Wenceslas, who became one of the patron saints of Bohemia. The basilica has served as a concert hall for several decades, especially for ancient sacred music. To the left of the All Saints Church Chapel is the round-shaped hall of the Aristocrat Institute. Maria Theresa of Austria ordered her servants to demolish some buildings and established a foundation home for ruined aristocratic families. The building is the work of Nicholas Pacassi and Anselmo Larago. Going towards Goldmaker's Lane, one can see the Lobkowitz Palace and the Supreme Burgrave's house, which were the house and the office of the Castellans. Goldmaker's Lane, or Zlata Ulička, is one of Prague's most famous sights. There are picturesque little houses here, which are stuck to the city wall like swallows' nests. Even though we know that medieval man was shorter, it's still hard to imagine how people could live here. There are small ornamented windows in the houses, small doors, and some even have a first floor with a tiny skylight. The rooms are full of old furniture, and one's head grazes the ceiling. Even Franz Kafka lived here for a while. However, he didn't mention it in his novels. Servants, maids, archers, and a few goldmakers lived here. They're to blame for the legend that there were alchemist experiments going on in these houses with the aim of creating gold. The truth is that those alchemists who could fool the king or some rich aristocrat mostly lived in a huge palace. At least one like the Faust house. The alchemist labs in the houses are not original. They were put here only for the sake of the tourists. In the other houses, one can buy craftsman's work and souvenirs. These things are sometimes made in front of one's eyes, like in the wax chandler's shop. One can also buy a poster or calendar showing these houses. The Dalibor Tower is at the end of the Golden Lane. It was not only a guard tower, but also a prison. There are some romantic legends associated with it, but the person who gave his name to the tower, Dalibor of Kozojed, would hardly think so. He was imprisoned here for 2 years before he was executed. His crime was that he helped the revolting serfs. His story was evoked in Smetana's opera, but it also became a part of Prague's rich collection of legends. From the Dalibor tower, the Vikarska street leads to the castle gate. There is the palace of the prebendal office and the third bastion of the castle in this street. But what is even more famous is Vikarska restaurant. It's a very renowned place. There's no high-ranking guest of the city who hasn't been brought here. From above, one can see the structure of the city. Prague has 10 districts. The old cities, Staré Mesto, Nové Mesto, Malá Strana, Hradčany, and Vyšehrad, united with the surrounding cities in 1922, when the city wall was demolished in 1875, at the same time as in Vienna. Královské Vyšehrady, Žižkov, Karlin, Holosovice, Bubenich, and the other parts of the town all used to be independent cities. At the foot of the royal palace, upon the filled-up moat, a walkway has been established. Sometimes it widens to a park, from where there's a great sight of the city, mainly at the nearby Church of St. Nicholas and its surroundings. The garden on the ramparts was made on the occasion of a visit by Franz Joseph I. There's the old royal palace from the Habsburg times above it, which is now only used as an office and storage space. The halls were always places for the most ceremonial state events. Today, they're used for representational purposes. The continuation of the garden on the ramparts was once the Paradise Garden, with the royal bath in it, where the clarions were sounding while the king was bathing. The bath is burnt down. The only remains are a green grove and a 40-ton, nicely carved stone pool. From beneath the castle walls, there are wide stairs leading back to the Hradčany Square. The most famous building around here is the Martinich Palace. The sign of the defenestrated governor can still be seen above the gate. There's a Virgin Mary statue in the middle of the square. It was erected out of gratitude after the plague evaded this part of the city. Schwarzenberg Palace is the most peculiar building of the square. One part of it is in Empire style, while the other one is in Renaissance style. The graffitos of the gigantic T-shaped facade were made on a Venetian pattern. The palace operates as a military history museum. There are many beautiful private palaces in Konovička and Kasarin streets. The latter leads to Lorentenska Street in front of the Castle District Town Hall. The two-winged Renaissance building was the administration center of the royal city during the early 1600s. This part, lying east of the Hradčany Square, grips the visitor with its various styles. Beside the huge palaces of the aristocracy, there are many small houses in the narrow streets, demonstrating the calm, lovely life of bygone centuries. There's a restaurant in the Golden Pear House. Kepler, the famous astronomer, lived in the New World Street for a while. Peter Parler lived at Loretenska 9 during the time he was working on the St. Vitus Cathedral. Nothing remained of the Gothic building. There's the prebendal office in its place, which is used for state events. Once, the building beside the temple was a parochial building. Today, it serves as a hospitable guest house. The Church of Virgin Mary of Loreto is one of Prague's most beautiful Baroque works. It was built as a copy of the Italian Loreto shrine in the 18th century. According to the Italian legend, the house in Nazareth, where the archangel appeared to Mary to tell her about the birth of Jesus, was taken by angels from Palestine to Loreto. After this, several copies of the place were built throughout Europe. There are at least 50 copies only in the Czech Republic. The most well-known and most beautiful is the one in the castle. It was designed with the help of Italian architects from donations by Princess Benigna Lobkowitz. The facade was finished by Dientzenhofer 100 years later. There's a silver altar, pictures depicting the life of Mary, and a statue of her carved from cedar tree. The treasury was filled thanks to the aristocrats. The clock of the tower was made in Amsterdam. Of course, there's a legend associated to the bell structure made of 27 bells. A poor woman lived nearby who had as many children as the temple had bells. When the plague struck Prague, she started to lose her children one by one. Her only treasure was a necklace made of silver coins. From the price of this necklace, she made the bells toll for her children. On her final hour, she had no more money left, but the church bells started to toll on their own. The building of the Foreign Ministry is one of Prague's largest palaces. It was designed by Italian architects for the Czernin family. The multi-storied building is 490 feet long and has a strict Baroque architecture while keeping some of the Palladio-like Renaissance elements. And so we bid farewell to Prague, the mother of all cities, which Goethe called the jewel in the crown of the world.